The whole building rattled when Chase Halcyon slammed the glass door open like he owned oxygen. All department heads upstairs. Now. I watched from my desk, fingers frozen mid-keystroke. Nobody moved. Not because we didn't hear, but because nobody had ever summoned Alan Greer like that before. Not once in 28 years. And now the man in the ironed navy suit, our new boy king CEO, was barking at ghosts. I turned to look down the narrow basement hall, past finance, past vendor intake, past the coffee machine that always smelled faintly like burnt rubber, and there he was, Alan. Standing at the end, still holding his thermos, still in that damn gray cardigan he wore every Friday like clockwork. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't flinch. He just nodded once, slowly, like he'd seen this exact moment in a dream. Before I go any further, real quick, please consider subscribing and giving this video a like. Seriously, 97% of people don't subscribe, and it really helps the team keep these stories coming. Just hit that little button. All right, back to it. See, most people at Halcyon Systems didn't really know what Alan did. They just knew things worked. We passed every audit. We hit every compliance checkpoint. Our government contracts, Department of Energy, Homeland Security, even one with FEMA, renewed like clockwork. Nobody asked why, because Alan made sure nobody had to. He built the lattice we all stood on, and we didn't even know it. That Friday morning, Chase Halcyon, the founder's son, newly anointed, armed with an MBA and the IQ of a lukewarm waffle, came stomping through the bowels of the building like he was looking for termites. He found Alan, dragged him, yes, dragged upstairs to the glass conference room with the retractable projector. And the first words out of Chase's mouth once everyone gathered, "We don't keep dead weight around here." I swear to God, I stopped breathing. He pointed at Alan like you'd point at a broken fax machine. "You've been here since fax machines, haven't you? That says enough. Pack your things." Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. Alan, stone-faced, just placed his thermos on the table, nodded again, and walked out. No last speech, no goodbyes, not even a cleared throat. He passed me on the way out. I stood. I didn't know why. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear. He looked at me, not through me, but at me, and said, "He just pulled the wrong pin." That's it. That's all he said. Then he was gone. I swear, the air changed after that. You know how before a storm, the whole sky kind of tightens? That's what it felt like, except the sky was inside the building. Chase strutted back to his office, full of himself, said we were restructuring for performance efficiency. That's what he called it in the Slack channel, performance efficiency. Funny thing is, nobody could get into Alan's systems after that. Not even IT. They said his folders were locked, encrypted. His workstation triggered a hardware lockout the second his badge went dark. It was like watching a haunted house seal itself shut. And in the break room, over burnt coffee and powdered creamer, we whispered what none of us dared say out loud yet. Halcyon just fired the man who was the company. And Chase? Chase didn't even know what he'd done. Chase painted over the company mural in the lobby the day after Alan left. Just marched in with a team of contractors, slapped a glossy charcoal gray over the whole damn thing, and said it was aesthetically outdated. The mural had been signed by every department head since 1999. Didn't matter. To Chase, if it didn't match his brand kit, it didn't belong. That week, he renamed the entire compliance division to Operational Velocity, said it sounded more agile. I swear, I saw a vein pop in Sandra's temple when she had to update her LinkedIn. Payroll got merged with data integrity. Legal became strategic trust. And vendor management? He just deleted it. "Everything's centralized now," he said. "No more dead ends." But that wasn't the part that chilled me. What chilled me was how he started scrubbing names, on paper, in meetings, on plaques. First it was quiet, phrases like, "We inherited this," or "before my time." But then it got mean. Legacy waste, complacent driftwood, dead weight. And that's when the Slack pinged. "Alan, report to Floor 12 conference in 10. Nobody spoke. We just stared at each other, like passengers hearing a noise under the plane mid-flight. I watched Alan walk into that elevator like he was heading to a dentist appointment he booked himself. Slow, calm, thermos still in hand. It was his Friday sweater again, the gray one with the worn elbows. He never broke routine, never gave the sharks a drop of blood. And when that elevator door opened back up, I swear it brought death with it. We were all crammed into the glass conference room, pretending to care about some metrics Chase wanted us to pretend were underwhelming. Then he stood, looked right at Alan. No greeting, no transition. "You've been here too long," Chase said. "This isn't a nursing home. We don't keep dead weight around here." And just like that, the air went out of the room. Chase crossed his arms like he expected applause. Alan didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just set his thermos on the table like he had every other Friday, looked at Chase like someone looks at a dog that's about to run into traffic, and said, "Understood." He didn't pack in a frenzy, didn't cry, didn't even get misty-eyed. He used a banker's box from under his desk, already flattened, like he'd always known he'd need it one day. Took exactly 5 things: his framed certificate from the DOE, the antique hole puncher nobody but him could fix, a faded folder labeled continuity, his coffee thermos, and a tiny brass key from his drawer. Then he locked it, left the drawer sealed, didn't say a word about it. Chase walked in 10 minutes later, puffed up like he'd won something. "We'll have IT crack that open," he said. "Probably just old pay stubs." I saw the way Alan's hand lingered over the drawer before he left, just a second longer than normal, like someone patting soil over a buried landmine. And Chase? Chase stepped right over it, smiling. That was the last time any of us saw Alan in the building. No goodbye email, no LinkedIn post, just gone. But something didn't sit right after that. The copier started spitting out error codes nobody could fix. The vendor portal crashed during a routine renewal. Government accounts started pinging missing credential authority. And every time someone asked Chase about it, he'd laugh. He was just a file clerk. Don't romanticize the guy. But some of us weren't laughing. Some of us remembered that Alan wasn't just legacy waste. He was the reason we had a legacy. And we all knew one thing. That drawer wasn't locked for nothing. It was raining the day Alan left. Not the dramatic kind either, just that quiet sideways drizzle that soaks your cuffs before you even notice. I watched him from the break room window, clutching that single banker's box like it weighed nothing. His steps were slow, unbothered, like a man who knew the house behind him was already on fire and figured he'd let the wind handle the rest. No outburst, no exit interview, no cardboard sign begging for justice. Just a locked drawer, a sealed thermos, and the kind of silence you only hear right before thunder. He didn't even take his badge, just left it on the HR desk with the lamination curling up at the edges. By noon, his access was disabled. Slack status went gray. IT declared his account successfully decommissioned. Chase posted a photo of himself in the glass elevator with the caption, "Out with the old. Halcyon 2.0 begins today." Meanwhile, Alan was sitting in a small vinyl chair in a split-level ranch, a half-warmed mug of black coffee on the table beside him, and a worn manila folder labeled in Sharpie, clause 82B, active. He opened it slowly, like it was a relic. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. One was a signed continuity clause from 2009, buried deep in a federal procurement framework, naming Alan Greer as a non-replicable key person asset on contracts involving confidential infrastructure systems. The second was a single contact card, burned into memory, not ink, one he'd only ever called once and only for testing. He made the call. No greeting, just a phrase. Clause 82B is now active. On the other end, a pause. Then, understood. Timetable? 24 hours. That was it. The call ended. Back at Halcyon, Chase was strutting through the exec floor in some hyper-tailored quarter zip like he was the quarterback of a tech startup, not the accidental heir to a compliance firm built on procedure and paranoia. His assistant, Brielle, had a stack of documents she clearly didn't understand, one of which was a $40 million federal renewal tied to a smart grid maintenance platform. She handed it to him with a nervous smile. Chase didn't even read it, just flipped to the last page, signed with a silver Mont Blanc, and leaned back like he'd just made history. "Easy money," he said. "No need to babysit these renewals anymore. The old guy made everything idiot-proof." That was the moment the knife twisted, because he was half right. Alan had idiot-proofed it, just not the way Chase assumed. Every major renewal was booby-trapped, not with explosives, but with protocols. redundancy triggers, multi-stage verification, and if a designated key person was removed without proper succession protocol, an automatic federal systems review was triggered. Allen knew Chase would never read the fine print, knew he'd treat the contract like a checklist, not a lifeline. Knew Brielle would hand him the document like a sandwich order, and he'd sign it between golf lessons and whatever overpriced bourbon he'd bragged about buying. By nightfall, a soft ping landed in the Department of Energy's procurement inbox. Flag, continuity breach detected, Halcyon Systems. Cause, termination of key person without replacement review. Status, escalation queued for federal audit. It didn't make the news. Not yet. These things take time. Bureaucracy doesn't panic. It coils. And as Chase poured himself a glass of Blanton's and opened Instagram to post a story captioned, "Making Moves," a government database 4 states away began parsing every contract Halcyon had touched in the last decade. Allen didn't need to go back. He didn't need revenge. He'd already written it into the bones. It started with a phone call from someone at the Department of Energy. Nothing dramatic, just a calm voice asking for Alan Greer's current point of contact. Brielle, Chase's assistant, blinked at the request like it was written in Latin. "Alan no longer works here," she chirped, flipping through the new org chart Chase had handed out that morning. "But I'm sure I can help. What's this regarding?" The voice paused. "Who replaced him?" She hesitated. I'm not sure he was officially replaced yet." The call ended politely, but Brielle's fingers were already trembling as she typed the conversation into her notes. She didn't tell Chase. The next day, it wasn't 1 call. It was 3, then 6. Procurement compliance confirmations, vendor chain of custody verifications, contractual continuity check-ins. All of them asking for Alan, and all of them ending the same way. Silence, then the quiet sound of the other end hanging up. By Wednesday, Chase was pissed. "Why is everyone acting like that old man was the Pope?" he snapped, pacing around his office like a coked-up house cat. "We've got legal. We've got IT. Just assign someone. Forward the damn calls." But here's the thing. None of the legacy systems worked. Not fully. Alan hadn't left behind passwords. He hadn't needed to. His compliance logs were encoded on a rotating 512-bit key structure that shifted every quarter. A system he built, refined, and maintained solo. It wasn't just secure. It was invisible if you didn't know how to look. The logs themselves existed on a partitioned drive Alan kept isolated from the network for federal integrity, which apparently nobody had ever questioned, because everything always worked. And now it didn't. So Brielle, bless her well-moisturized soul, spent 6 hours in the server archive room with an IT contractor who kept mumbling phrases like zero trust architecture and kernel-level locking until she started crying. Meanwhile, a junior analyst named Darius, who everyone ignored unless their spreadsheet broke, was digging through old records trying to update Halcyon's federal registry entries. That's when he found it. A scanned memo from 2011, signed by the original board, time-stamped, marked as internal only. Title: Key Person Clause, Continuity Risk, Greer, A. He flagged it and sent it up the chain. It landed on Chase's desk at 3:47 p.m. He didn't even open the attachment. Just replied, "We don't run this place like a retirement home anymore. Archive it." But Darius didn't delete it. Instead, he dug deeper, pulled up the vendor logs, cross-checked entries tied to Alan's login history, and noticed something weird. Several vendors had redacted entries, meaning their profiles were visible. But every line of contract metadata had been scrubbed. Dates, contacts, renewal terms, all blank. All of them with one common link: Alan. Darius flagged that too, brought it to Brielle. She took one look at the entries and said, "We need to show this to legal." Legal never responded. Not officially. But a few hours later, a man in a gray windbreaker from the Office of Federal Procurement walked into the building without an appointment. Said he just had a few questions about the recent personnel changes. He didn't wait for an answer, just walked toward the elevators like he'd already memorized the floor plan. That was the first time I saw Chase sweat. Really sweat. Not performative stress for attention. Real biological panic. He kept rubbing his neck like his collar was too tight, even though it was unbuttoned. Kept asking Brielle for updates she didn't have. kept repeating, "This is just legacy noise, right? It'll pass. It's noise." But we all knew something Chase didn't. Alan wasn't noise. Alan was the signal, and it was getting louder. We knew something serious had shifted when the founder himself, Walter Halcyon, walked through the front doors without warning. No blazer, no assistant, just his old leather briefcase, and that looked like someone had scratched his Cadillac with a key. I hadn't seen him in nearly 6 months. Last we heard, he was on executive sabbatical, which was code for sipping bourbon in Hilton Head and letting his son pretend to be a king. But that morning, he walked straight through reception like Moses parting the Red Sea, didn't say a word, didn't make eye contact, didn't even stop for his usual decaf espresso, just made a beeline to the executive suite on floor 14 where Chase was holding his daily transformation pulse meeting. Yes, that was what he called it. A circle of nodding VPs gathered around him like toddlers at story time, while he barked phrases like agility and performance recalibration and bragged about how legacy overhead was finally offloaded. When Walter walked in, the room froze. You don't need a badge when your name is on the building. Chase stood up, all smiles and slick hair. "Dad," he started. Walter cut him off. "I heard from Stevens at DOE, said Halcyon's vendor logs bounced back, unreadable. I thought that was impossible. Then he said the system flagged a key person removal without replacement protocol." Chase blinked. "Yeah, we cleaned house. Old man in compliance. Greer? I cut him loose last week. He was ancient. Half the team didn't even know what he did." Walter didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. He just stared at his son, the way you'd look at mold on a wedding cake. "You fired Alan Greer," he said slowly, like he was still trying to believe it. Chase shrugged. "He was dead weight. I have a guy rewriting the whole compliance framework. We're going cloud native. It's more efficient." Walter didn't respond. He just turned around and walked out. Not fast, not slow, but heavy. You could feel the air following him, like the room had lost its oxygen. 10 minutes later, he was in the basement. Nobody had been down there since Alan left. The lights flickered when you walked in. The carpet still smelled like dust and burnt toner. But Walter moved with purpose. I followed him, quietly, because something in my gut said whatever was about to happen would matter. He reached the archive wall behind Alan's old desk, where the physical contract binders were stored. Most were untouched, the kind of thing you keep just in case. But Walter went to the bottom left drawer, one I'd never seen opened. He turned a key he'd had on his ring since 1996. Inside was a single black folder, unlabeled, locked with a brass clasp. He opened it slowly. Inside, a 4-page legacy clause, hand-signed, dated 2009, titled Clause 82B, Continuity of Federal Engagement. It was dry legal text, but the summary said it all. If Alan Greer is removed from his position without board consultation and transitional audit protocol, all federal contracts held by Halcyon Systems immediately enter review status. Any attempt to transfer custodianship without compliance cross-certification will be considered breach of agreement. Countersigned, Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, and the Federal Procurement Oversight Council. Walter stared at the signature block for a long time. Then he sat down in Alan's old chair, the one with the squeaky left wheel, and placed both hands on the folder like it was a coffin lid. I didn't speak. I didn't move. He looked up at me, eyes wet but not weak. "My idiot son," he whispered, just lit a match in a room full of oxygen. Upstairs, Chase was pitching a product overhaul to a boardroom full of people who'd stopped listening. His phone vibrated on the table. Then again. Then again. Brielle walked in, pale and shaking, and handed him a tablet. "It's from legal," she said. "You need to read it." He scanned the document. His face dropped 3 shades. Clause 82B, he looked up. "We can fix this," he stammered. Walter walked in behind him, folder in hand. "No," he said. "You can't." They arrived in silence. No sirens, no badges flashing, no agents in windbreakers shouting about jurisdiction. Just 4 federal auditors in plain clothes, clipboards in hand, escorted through the lobby by a trembling facilities manager who clearly hadn't been briefed. You could feel it in the building, the sudden drop in temperature, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence. We all knew what they were. We just didn't know how bad it was going to get. The lead auditor asked to see the continuity officer. Nobody knew what that meant. Chase tried to bluff his way through the first meeting, sat down in his sleek office, tossed them some polished PDFs full of buzzwords and half-finished charts, called it a proactive documentation cycle. The auditor just looked up and said, "Where is Mr. Greer's digital continuity signature?" Chase blinked. "He doesn't work here anymore." The auditor nodded, closed his folder, and made a call. 10 minutes later, 3 of our federal contracts, worth $87 million combined, were frozen. Not paused, not delayed, frozen. Like someone had snapped a switch. Then came the real problem. Our system started locking out users. At first it was just finance. Brielle couldn't access the vendor payout logs. Then legal lost access to the contract templates. The new guy Chase hired to streamline compliance got booted mid-upload and couldn't get back in. Even the IT director, full admin, called an emergency stand-up to admit the system was rejecting master credentials. It was Alan, or more specifically, what Alan built. We'd always joked his systems were Alan-proof. What we didn't know was they were everyone else-proof too. He'd embedded a biometric trigger into the compliance kernel, a hardware layer lock tied directly to his thumbprint. As long as Alan checked in weekly through a secured terminal, everything stayed open. No Alan, no access. And when I say access, I mean everything. The export compliance tracker, the ethical procurement chain, the federal data firewall validation logs, even the semi-annual self-reporting disclosures we were required to submit to maintain Department of Energy clearance. The auditors didn't even raise their voices. They just watched the system lock itself from the inside like a submarine sealing for descent. By noon, a 4th contract was flagged. This one hurt more than the others. It wasn't just about continuity, it was about ethics. Alan had built a tripwire into the system, a silent reporting mechanism that activated if more than 3 continuity failures were detected in a 48-hour window. It didn't just freeze operations, it alerted an ethics compliance review panel, which meant someone, somewhere in a government office, had just received a detailed report about every suspicious contract Chase had greenlit in the last 6 months, including the one tied to his college roommate's startup. The one that somehow got awarded a back-end software revamp contract without public bid. The one we all knew stank, but nobody had the guts to say it out loud. Until now. Leadership didn't panic. Not the way you think. They imploded quietly. The CFO tried to call legal. Her line was dead. The general counsel had already left the building. The VP of sales stormed out after Chase accused him of sinking morale. And Chase? Chase was holed up in his glass office, staring at a dead laptop, watching the spinning wheel of a login screen that no longer recognized his name. I walked past him on my way to the break room. He didn't even notice me, just kept whispering, "This can't be happening." But it was. Alan didn't come back. He didn't need to. He'd already written the system like a will, with instructions for what to do when the wrong hands took control. Not a kill switch, a reckoning protocol. This wasn't sabotage, it was design. Brielle looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. Her perfect blowout was a frizzy mess, mascara smudged into raccoon eyes, and her normally perky, "Can I grab you a LaCroix?" voice had dropped to a dead whisper. She was huddled in the copy room, not for copies, but because it was the only place left without a glass wall, typing something with shaking hands into her personal Gmail. The subject line just said, "Alan, please." We didn't know what she wrote exactly. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe it was begging. All we know is she hit send, then collapsed into one of those flimsy plastic chairs and started crying into a box of promo pens. Chase didn't know she sent it. Not yet. He was too busy playing CEO in a corner office with no access to his own calendar. The boardroom down the hall had been temporarily closed for a private review, which was HR's polite way of saying emergency hearing. 3 board members flew in that morning. One of them, I swear, left his suitcase in the lobby and walked straight into the meeting without taking off his coat. 10 minutes after Brielle's email went out, she got a reply. No subject, no message body, just a single PDF attachment. Fill a name. Severance rejection, trigger 82b.pdf. She clicked it. 4 pages, pre-formatted, time-stamped. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even emotional. It was protocol, plain and brutal. It detailed that Allen had refused severance during his departure because of what was referred to as anticipated misuse of continuity responsibilities. The document outlined 3 conditions under which he would permanently decline re-engagement if leadership attempted to rewrite continuity frameworks without board oversight, if any federal contract was signed post-termination using Allen's prior frameworks, if the system initiated its own self-reporting clause due to ethical non-compliance. All 3 had happened. At the bottom of the last page in clean font, all support permissions are permanently revoked. Good luck. Chase finally noticed the tension outside his office and stomped down the hall to demand answers. Brielle tried to intercept him, but it was too late. The boardroom door cracked open. Walter Halcyon stood inside, eyes dark, mouth drawn into a tight line. "Dad," Chase started, voice pitching high. "We're working on damage control, but—" Walter held up a hand. Not a slap, just a pause, the kind that silences everything. "I called him," he said. Everyone froze. "I called Allen, myself. No assistant, no email. I asked him what it would take to come back." The silence was thick. "And?" Chase asked, desperate now. Walter looked directly at his son. He said, "I already left." And then he hung up. Nobody moved. Not the board members, not Brielle, not the receptionist peeking around the corner. It was as if the building itself stopped to listen. Chase stammered, "But he can't just—" "He did," Walter cut in. "And now we deal with what you broke." An emergency vote was called, behind closed doors. We weren't privy to what was said, but word spread like wildfire through the office that Chase had authorized 3 non-compete violations in the past month, that his friend's startup was under informal investigation, that Halcyon's federal contract status was being reviewed indefinitely, and most damning, that Alan Greer had been named in 7 government documents as the sole verified continuity officer for the systems we no longer controlled. The board wasn't reviewing Alan's absence anymore. They were reviewing Chase's existence. By the time the vote concluded, Chase's nameplate had been removed from his door. Quietly. No memo, no explanation. Just gone. He walked out that night without saying a word. Face pale, jaw clenched. Brielle watched him from behind the printer, still holding that PDF like it was the last piece of scripture. Alan never came back through those doors. He didn't need to. He wasn't absent. He was finished. The glass plaque outside Chase's office was gone by morning, just 2 faint squares where the adhesive pads used to be. No announcement. No farewell email. Just white space, like the building itself was erasing him frame by frame. Whispers started early. Administrative leave. Pending investigation. Interim leadership pending full board review. HR said he'd be reachable off-site, which was code for "we've unplugged his access and changed the locks." What really sealed it wasn't just that Chase was gone. It was who replaced him. Janet Trumbull, the quiet woman who used to sit 2 doors down from Alan in the basement, always wearing those orthopedic shoes and cardigans the color of sidewalk chalk. Most people assumed she was close to retirement. What they didn't know? She'd been shadowing Alan's continuity models for nearly a decade. Not in title, not in glory, but in the spaces where real systems are handed down, not written up. The board made her interim chair. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't change the slogan. She just walked into Chase's former office, looked around once, nodded, and said, "First order of business, repair trust." Meanwhile, Alan didn't gloat, didn't tweet, didn't send cryptic messages to former colleagues or bask in the downfall like a movie villain with a cigar. He just got on a plane. Destination: DC. There, behind closed doors and a thick conference table at the Department of Energy, he was offered something he never asked for, a new title. Not inside Halcyon, but above it. Federal Compliance Transition Advisor. It came with full security clearance, access to vendor oversight frameworks, and the authority to recommend or blacklist firms during contract reviews. He read the offer, folded it, thought for a long time. Then he slid it back and said, "One condition." The official across from him raised an eyebrow. "Name it." Halcyon Systems is to be removed from all federal shortlist eligibility for a minimum of 5 years. The room was quiet. The official asked, "Personal?" Alan didn't blink. "Structural." And that was that. Within a week, the decision was filed. Halcyon, once a mainstay in the infrastructure compliance field, was blacklisted, not banned, not dissolved, just excluded. Silently, efficiently, like a door closing without a sound. Back at headquarters, the mood shifted. Janet didn't try to save face. She called it what it was. The reckoning of neglect. Vendor emails stopped coming. Federal inboxes went quiet. Old partnerships ghosted us like we'd infected their calendars. A new kind of silence took over, not the tense, uncertain one that followed Alan's departure, but the settled hush of consequence. And somewhere in a quiet office in D.C., Alan sat with a view of the Potomac, sipping black coffee from his thermos. The same one he carried out of the building. The same one he'd left on that conference table when Chase fired him without warning. No victory parade, no revenge speech. Just a man who never asked to be important. Finally watching the house he built be protected from the termites who thought it was theirs. He never put his name on the door. He didn't have to. The people who mattered already knew it was his. The lights in the conference center were dim, the kind of low, flattering hue reserved for senators and expensive mediocrity. Rows of navy suits and tightly wound ponytails lined the audience, faces angled up toward the stage where a simple placard read, "Continuity, Contracts, and the Cost of Arrogance," presented by Alan Greer. He stood at the podium, no slides, no logo-heavy PowerPoint behind him. Just a mic, a paper cup of black coffee, and that damn cardigan. Cleaner now, but still unmistakably him. "I worked in the same building for 28 years, he began, voice even. "Never had a title anyone remembered, never asked for one. My name was rarely on the first slide, but my initials were on every contract that kept the lights on." A few people chuckled politely. Most just listened. "I wasn't flashy," he continued. "Didn't scale, didn't synergize verticals. Hell, I barely knew how to open half the apps they forced us to use, but I knew how to read. Really read." The room leaned in, because buried in every renewal, every federal agreement, every clause and counterclause was one common thread: continuity. And when you treat continuity like a hindrance, when you rip out the foundation just to repaint the walls, you don't modernize, you compromise. It was quiet when he finished. Not a standing ovation, not viral applause, just stillness, the kind people remember. Then a reporter in the back stood up. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The old job? The routine?" Alan smiled, not smug, not nostalgic, just tired and a little amused. "I miss the coffee," he said. "Ours was always terrible, and I made peace with that. But I don't miss the job, because the job stopped being the job long before I left. The moment people started caring more about dashboards than details, that's when it broke." He stepped back. There was a moment, right before the lights dimmed again, when a man slipped into the back of the room. Late. No lanyard, no welcome packet, dressed like he was trying to blend in, but nothing hides shame like that, not when it's fresh. Chase. He didn't sit. There were no empty chairs. He stood against the back wall, arms folded, face drawn, watching the man he once dismissed as dead weight hold the room with nothing but his voice. Alan looked out across the rows, let his gaze land gently, even briefly, on that final silhouette. No recognition, no grudge, just gravity. And then he ended. "If you treat experience like dead weight," he said, slow and deliberate, "don't be surprised when the foundation collapses." No mic drop, no dramatic walk-off, just a pause, a nod, and the final line almost to himself as he stepped down. "They read my badge, but never my contract."